know about you, but I feel like tipping has gotten out of control, and it's even a term for this called Tipflation, and it is the amount of people who are asking for tips, and the amount of tips has grown exponentially over the last 3, almost 4 years now. So exactly how did we get here, and where could we be going next? Let's go ahead and break it down. When we talk about the history of tipping, it's actually quite interesting, or at least to me, someone who has written a history book. But it started off in the 1700s in Europe, and it was mostly a thing that rich people did, and it was to ensure prominence. That's what tip stands for. And they would throw gold coins out of their carriages when they were crossing, and to ensure their passage from point A to point B, and just, hey, I'm rich, make sure I get here nicely. They would throw their money out the window, and the people who are on the roads would pick them up. That's how it started. And then it became a lot less popular in Europe and became more popular in the United States. But what happened in the US? Remember, people from Europe came over here, started a colony, and that became the United States. Now, at that time, tipping was not popular until the abolition of slavery in the 1860s. That is when African Americans could legally go out and get jobs, but there was a company called the Pullman Company that operated a railroad. They didn't want to pay those people. Okay, they didn't want to pay them, and that is when tipping became popular, because it was a way for them, for the workers to get paid without the company paying them directly. And tipping from that point forward became the norm in the United States, and laws were passed where now the tipping minimum wage, also known as the sub-minimum wage, pays about $2.13 in most, but not all states. So that is how tipping became the establishment that it is today, but things have changed over the years. So for example, in the 1950s, the regular average tip was about 10%. In the 1970s, it crept up to about 15%. And now is anywhere between 15 to 25%, with the average being a 21% tip. So things have increased. And then you've probably noticed this as well. You used to only really tip people who would take your bags at a hotel, you would tip at a restaurant, and that was kind of it. But now you're tipping at coffee shops. In some cases, you're tipping at a drive-thru. Amazon even had a tipping program for your driver, which has always been interesting to me because, and let me get this right, Amazon made over $100 billion in revenue, and their profits just in Q3 was nearly $9.88 billion. Profits. Okay, a $9 billion company is asking people like you and me to tip people that they can easily pay themselves. So they're just interesting there. But we are starting to see, and we have seen, a wave of tips increasing in the amount of people who are asking for these tips as well. So how did we really get this shift? Well, number one, I would say it's probably 4 of these things, but number one, a lot of this started with the pandemic. As you likely remember, when things shut down, this really hurt people in the service industry. They did not have the option to work from home because that's just obvious, right? You had, let's take a restaurant for example. This is when deliveries and DoorDash and other companies really started to get a lot of notoriety. Remember, this is also when stay-at-home stocks did quite well at that point in time. Well, during that period, you could have someone cook the food and have someone deliver the food, but the people who would serve right there in the middle didn't have an opportunity to get any money, right, or any income. And that's one of the reasons why the stimulus check became a thing, but it's also why companies started to ask for tips before service. Before service. Remember, that wasn't always a thing. You usually would go, you would eat, and then you would tip once you got the bill at the end of the day. That was kind of the order of operations. Again, not the case anymore because of how the pandemic really flipped everything on its head. So out of sympathy, I would say also out of requirement, people were tipping more and it became a more prominent thing. And in some service industries, they would ask for tips that weren't commonly given, like at a coffee shop, like at a drive-thru, in other areas. Like for example, we'll talk about this a bit more too, it's normal to tip your delivery driver. Like I remember in the 90s and early 2000s when I would order pizza over the phone before we had apps, I knew that if the pizza was $20, I know I was supposed to give them $25 or so because of the tip for delivery, right? That's just how it was back then. Well, now if I go and pick up that pizza, or I go and pick up wings from any restaurant, sometimes you are nudged to give a tip just for picking up your own food as well. And again, not something that was normal just, in 2019 or 2018. This was not something that was common or even, accepted at that point in time. But things have changed. So the pandemic was a major part of this. Another thing, technology. We are now used to seeing a lot of those usually white kiosks that you flip around and it will give you some tipping options, which are set by the business, which is always interesting because the business is basically building in another way to, one, pay their employees, but also increase their profits. And they can say easily, hey, $1, $5, $10, or start it off and say 15%, 20, or 30%, and you have to sit there and choose. And because of companies like Square, which we might have to put that on our radar here pretty soon because it is starting to act right and the stock is starting to rise. Companies like Square, like Toast, this has made it a lot easier for a lot of these companies to easily just have you type in exactly how much you want to give right at the point of payment, which again is before you receive your item. So that is a part of it. Before you even get your service, you're being asked to tip at the beginning of this entire transaction. So that's another part of it. And then there's the, let's call it the public factor, the embarrassment factor, or the pressure factor, if you want to look at it like that. When you turn around this giant screen, right, and the person is staring you in the face, and this does this awkward transition, right? You turn the screen around, you have to sit there and decide how much do you want to tip them while you're in line, while you're with your date. Perhaps your kids are looking at you at the same time trying to figure out how much you are going to pay this person before you get the service. And that's one reason why we started to see tip inflation too, because you are a little bit pressured to hit whatever the biggest amount is, depending on how many people are in the store, depending on who's with you, and how that whole situation can play out for you. So that's something that really has contributed to it as well. And again, the timing factor, I think, is a major portion of this. Yes, we are being asked to tip before the service occurs, right? Again, normally it was after I've had a pleasant service, after the service is done, I'm inspecting the meal, or I've had a great meal, or they've done something for me, and then I pull out a $20 bill or what have you, right? Think of it like valet service. After the car is parked, or after I get the car back, that is when I would tip, normally, right? Well, now that timing has changed, you now feel more obligated to tip now so that the service is good. Like, really think about that. So if I'm asked to tip before a meal or before something happens, and when I say before a meal, I'm really thinking of something like DoorDash or Uber Eats or in any transaction. Well, now I'm like, hey, if I tip you low right now in the very beginning, or don't tip at all, then my coffee is not going to taste as good, or my meal is not going to taste as good, or something not great is going to happen between now and at the end of service versus the other way around. And that's another way that businesses have been able to increase their revenue at some times, and one way that we could be paying a bit more than what we were used to, and has contributed to our feeling of inflation outside of the actual inflation. Now, yes, there is an opposite side of this, right? There's a business owner side and then the person who is receiving the tips. I will say though that those in the service industry that make the majority of their money from tips have a 3 times higher poverty rate. So their poverty rate, again, is 3 times higher than that of the norm. The median pay for those who get their primary income from tips is around $23,800. So it is not great. Now, I am not going to be here to argue that it should be a $15 minimum wage or whatever the solution may be. However, the end of the day, we have seen an increase in this technology, and we have seen an increase in this behavior. So that is exactly how we got here. Now the next question is, will it end? Will this end? Will things go back to normal? I mean, it's been several years since the pandemic, or at least the height of the pandemic. I would not be confident in that, because especially if you are a business, once you are used to getting a certain revenue stream, it's not something that you just get away from. Okay, it's not something you get away from. My real question would be, for how much longer is this going to last, in terms of like, is it going to continue to expand? The next time I go get an oil change, will I also have to tip there? That is a question that I would have. When I go to the doctor's office, will I also be asked to tip there? And I'm curious, I'm extremely curious too. Let me know, what is the strangest place that you have been asked to be tipped? Okay, for me, it's going and picking up my own wings. That was just strange to me, because that's not something, like, I had to drive and pick it up. Y'all should be paying me the delivery fee, because I'm already paying for the food. Okay, so it's not like I got them for free. Like, why am I also tipping here? That's just me. Yes, I do tip. No, I'm not a big fan of it, but would love to hear where your strangest tip request has come from. But in terms of things getting more expensive, tips are a part of it. I would not say it is a majority of it, but also the American dream as a whole has gotten more expensive. You want to know exactly how much the American dream costs today, then this is the video that you want to watch next.